Hi and welcome to CoBB. We know this isn't normally what you hear at the top of any episode of ours so far, but this one is special. We're coming up on our 50th episode, and Sudeep and I really want to thank you for listening, for the comments you've sent, for the feedback you've given us, and especially for the suggestions of the topics you've made, because that's where we sometimes struggle because we don't know what to talk about, and we've leaned on you to tell us what you want to listen, and that's helped us a big deal. And going forward, we'd love to organize this a little better.
So, guys, the idea is to try and get to know you and your preferences better. And to facilitate that, we'll be putting a form in the show notes as well as in the comments wherever you're listening this podcast from. We request you to share something about yourself as well as some of your preferences and feedback for the show, and that will help us customize the content and make it even more useful for you. Looking forward for this small help from your end and hoping to provide you content that you will continue to love and continue to listen. Thank you very much.
Welcome to CoBB, Conversations on the Business of Brands with Sudeep Chawla and Sharan Raghavan.
I think our listeners, when they start the podcast and they hear me laughing like a madman, I should possibly clarify why am I laughing. I'm laughing, Sharan, because I read the title of the topic that you picked today. And let me read it out for all the listeners. It says, "क्योंकि Fortune 500 भी कभी एक startup थी."
Yes.
So now, presenting to you, ladies and gentlemen, our very own Ekta Kapoor, Sharavana Raghavan, and he seems to have gotten inspired by, I don't know why he has picked up this particular series, unless he has gone and watched it sometime in the
See,
past.
even before you take pot shots at me, you should appreciate that an episode that I'm leading has got a Hindi title.
Oh, correct. Correct. I think that calls for an achievement. Sharuna writing in Hindi title in itself should be a big achievement. And by doing this, he has opened for himself a lot of clients in Hindi heartland.
I already go to the Hindi Heartland.
Oh,
When
okay.
clients ask me if I speak Hindi, I say I do, but
Ah,
you might find it difficult to understand it. So the onus is always on my clients to understand the Hindi I speak.
correct. So you can start with this title. They will laugh out loud, and you will be able to break the ice. But
Right.
coming back, why have you picked this title and the topic, Sharon?
So this is something I picked up because of my clients. And I've been working in the FMCG space quite a bit in the last few years. And I see a lot of similar problems and a lot of people wanting to do everything at the same time, not able to prioritize their objectives. And came down to the point that I had to tell them, pause, listen, you don't have to focus on everything right now. Given the stage your business is at, there are different focuses you need to have. So FMCG itself is considered the the mother of sales and marketing, right? And there are such low barriers to entry, even low barriers to exit. If you don't have manufacturing of your own, there's nobody even stopping your exit from the market. You can just get up and go. And the mass appeal of the business itself is has a bit of a glamour quotient to it. So everybody wants to get in, and everybody wants to be big the big billion brand, the Fortune 500 company. It it would augur well for all of us to understand that no matter how big we want to be, we need to start small. And the other issue with FMCG is that it's a highly competitive space. There are too many players. It's considered a category volatile industry where there are always too many problems to be solved. But having worked across the companies that I have worked and having engaged with clients of different sizes in the last few years, I say the FMCG business evolution is largely predictable. It's not necessarily predictable on a timeline, but it's predictable by the phases. So when I say that, a business does not need to spend certain amount of time or years in every stage, but they will go through these stages depending on the ambition they have. And to get that, this is the only route. And therefore, I've divided this into 6 stages of an FMCG business's evolution.
Hmm. Okay, interesting. Sounds like a structure that uh, possibly anybody can refer to when
Hmm,
they're trying to track where each company is located and what should be the next phase or the next step for them.
absolutely. So the whole point of this, right, is when breaking it up into 6 stages, is that when you sit back and look at where your business is, then you know very clearly what your next step is going to be and what you need to focus on for now. And that's the whole objective of this episode.
Okay, so let's start with the first stage. What's that one, Sharon?
First is obviously the startup phase, where your excitement is at its peak. It's usually a business that's born out of an innovative concept, driven by passion, appetite for change. So it's a lot of drive, adrenaline is pumping at that stage. The possibilities seem endless, but success is very uncertain. And you have a small team, you have a very small founding team. Everybody's organically pulled in the same direction. There's no real need for coordination. You just need resources to kick things off. And this is also the honeymoon phase of any business, right? And these businesses usually have the main problem you face at this stage is that of scarce resources, because you're constrained on finance, you're constrained on people, you're constrained on technology. It's pretty much everything you think you need for growth, you're constrained on. And you don't have market validation. You have an idea. You might have a product that you managed to put together, but it's not proven in the market. No matter how much research you've done, this applies even for the largest companies. You and I know that no matter how much research you do, there's no proof until the product is in the market and it's getting sold. So you're not validated and you don't see how you're going to make money out of it. There's no visible profit in the horizon. And invariably, at least it's wise to have your manufacturing outsourced and somebody else is making it for you, and you don't have to take on the intensity at that stage. And so here, every the startups that I work with, right, they're like, I want to be that big, I want to take on this company, take on that company. It's great to have ambition, but at this stage, the primary focus for any startup business in the FMCG space is to find product market fit. It is the proof of concept. Whether it's been validated by the market research or not, like I said, it's got to be validated by the consumer picking it up in the market.
Hmm.
And one caution I'll give is that something we used to say in the theater circles when I used to do theater back so many years ago, said never believe the annual day crowd. So when you come up with a new show, you always have your family members, friends and family coming in, and they will always fill up the first show you put up. And in the second show, suddenly there are less than 10 people sitting in the audience. So,
Hmm.
especially with the brands that you're creating, the business that you're creating, friends and family have the ability to either kill you with kindness or absolutely shatter your expectations with bluntness. And both of it is not good for you. Consumers got to speak. And at this stage, when I say product market fit, it's about understanding the inherent right to win in the market space for the business you're creating. You need to understand what it will take for you to scale and who this product actually is for. You can validate that in the market. Then you look at going on to the next stage, which, I mean, talking about the next stage, there are many businesses that don't make it out of the startup phase.
Hmm.
And I think of that as a good thing,
Okay.
because if you get out of this and then you have your losses, you're going to lose even bigger. the more churn that happens at the startup phase, the
Hmm.
more the learnings, better the chance of the same people coming up with a different business.
Hmm.
And when a lot of people look at the Western markets, pick up a concept and try and do that in the local markets, not just India, pretty much anywhere. And that may or may not work. And once you have that, is when you can start going after investors. I don't necessarily mean VCs, but I'm talking about partners, manufacturing partners, loans, people who will help you negate this problem of lack of resources because you've proven that this is a winnable concept in the market.
Hmm. Okay. Fair. So therefore, now that we have explored the startup phase, what's the next phase that we go to, Sharon?
Next phase is something I call the long chew, because once your product is validated by the market and you have a idea of a viable business, now it suddenly becomes from a project, it actually becomes a business. And when you have to start utilizing the money you're raising or the loans you're getting to put in actual infrastructure for the business, it's it's a, it's a small sign, but it's the first sign of having arrived in the FMCG world, because you're being accepted by the consumer, which is the ultimate truth. But you have challenges of setting up distribution, assembling your back end and front end teams, aligning larger teams. So what was organic earlier has now got to be organized.
Hmm.
So you got to put those things in place. You got to look at high trade margins. You end up having to give them a lot of trade margins. When I say wholesale, retail, you end up parting with a lot of margin because you need retail or market presence. And because you are new in the system, you end up having to promote a lot just to be visible to the consumer. You end up giving a lot of discounts, and invariably your margins will be low. And this is a stage where also a lot of businesses want to take or need to take a strategic decision whether they want to expand or not.
Okay, but isn't expansion the natural consequence of growing bigger and your ambition to grow faster?
Not necessarily,
Mm-hmm.
because you see a lot of businesses that make wafer thin margins on high volume, and they've set up a certain go to market infrastructure. They say, I'm happy with that. I don't want to expand because right now I have no struggle to survive. I'm making enough money to get by. So, growth is something not everybody needs to aspire for. And if you look back, Sudeep, you look at a lot of the local businesses that we remember would just be happy doing it locally there. They
Hmm.
would not even focus on amplifying things too much. They have a steady state. They don't really aspire for too much growth. So you can, I mean, I'm not saying it's right or wrong, to each his own, but you can get by without a greater ambition at this stage. You can be
Yeah.
part of the FMCG world and
Yeah.
get by.
Yeah. And
But
that possibly is true, possibly in any stage.
absolutely
If you limit your ambition, so therefore, even if you are startup, for example, with limited ambition, you will also therefore go for a very limited PMF. You will
right.
possibly not exploit it. Okay, fair. So fair assumption. Go ahead.
So I can give you an example for this because my hometown is Coimbatore. I'll give you an example from Coimbatore.
Mm-hmm.
There was this fantastic banana chips brand called
Mm-hmm.
A1. He would
Yeah.
make it fresh right there in the market
Mm.
and he would sell. And he would not even open a second store. He would just sell from that one single store. And then now, with a lot of everybody getting into a lot of other brands getting into the banana chips business, he's suddenly woken up saying, now I want to market my brand. So these inflection points also happen.
Yeah.
But
Okay.
these people can stay in, I call it the long queue because businesses can exist for even up to 20 years in the same space.
Hmm. Hmm. Okay. Fair. Yeah.
And progressing from this is actually a two-pronged progression. I'd say the next one, the stage three, is I'd say 3A, 3B. 3A would be the brand optimization. So, like I gave the example of A1 chips, a
Hmm.
business, by virtue of having been in business for a long period of time, ends up having a reputation, and that reputation becomes a brand.
Hmm.
And traditionally, that's how most of our famous brands today have been built. Even your Tatas and Godreges as brands, they are brands out of reputation than structured or accelerated brand building. The problem with that is it takes its own sweet time, sometimes even generations,
Hmm.
because you build a certain nostalgia factor, you still build a certain trust factor or familiarity with the consumer.
Hmm.
And at that stage, you start leveraging that
Hmm.
brand value. Now,
Hmm.
the whole point being, when the business becomes the brand is when your value creation begins. That's when you can start commanding a higher margin. And for that, because your reputation has become a brand, you then start expanding your business a little bit. You start commanding a premium for the reputation you've created in the market. 3B, however, is the brand building phase. These are people who don't have the patience to wait 20 years in the long queue. Once the GTM or distribution is set up, they want to expand business. They are the guys who take the call to expand. They
Hmm.
want to build their brand. They take charge of building their brand. They
Hmm.
don't wait for it to just happen. And
Hmm.
it's conscious brand building
Hmm.
with the objective to take on the narrative, build margins, and expand category, and not wait for time to give them the chance to do that.
Hmm. So
And
if we go back to some of the episodes that we had done earlier, Sharon, we
mhm,
spoke about branding and marketing.
right,
So, branding was about the fact that you carefully construct the set of promises you want to make to your consumer.
mhm,
So, what you said in 3A is possibly about after years of delivering on that promise, that becomes your branding.
right,
3B possibly is about marketing. So, you know what promise you're going to make. You
exactly.
tested it via PMF, and then you advertise or take it to the consumers.
Hmm,
And even before they have experienced your brand, they know what your promise is.
right.
Okay. Yeah.
Because
Fair.
you are amplifying the promise
Hmm.
to bring in, you're creating that customer pull in the market.
Yeah.
Because in the long queue, it's always push sale. That's why you're giving in promotions, you're giving up more margin to trade. You optimize all of that in the brand building phase,
Hmm.
and you take charge of it.
Thank you for listening to CoB, Conversations on the Business of Brands with Sudeep Chawla and Sharvana Raghavan. Subscribe and learn more at cobcast.net. That's CoBBCAST.net.
Sharon, we have also seen that there are startups that do brand building. What would you say to that?
Startups can do brand building,
Hmm.
but when you build your brand without your basic go to market or distribution in place,
Hmm.
then you're not servicing the brand. If you
Hmm.
go back to the Byron Sharp conversation we mentioned a few episodes ago,
Hmm.
it's about one, creating memory structures. So basically, people need to remember you, and you have
Yeah.
to make it easy for them to buy. So
Yeah.
mental availability and physical availability.
Hmm.
And if you cannot ensure physical availability for the masses, then there's no point of creating the mental availability.
Hmm. Maybe it might also be worth mentioning that when we say startup here, it does not mean any startup. So even a startup, when a we really mean it is a startup when it is in PMF stage.
Right.
When that startup progresses ahead, it goes into the long queue and goes into 3A 3B. So
Yeah.
for example, a boat today is not a startup anymore.
Not at all.
Yeah.
They're definitely in the brand building phase, which is 3B.
Correct.
That's where they are.
So maybe it might be worth mentioning that, because otherwise the word startup is fairly loosely used. Anybody who
True.
is slightly smaller or is doing a internet first business is called startup, regardless of how old have they been in the system. So I think it might be worth mentioning that and clarifying.
I think it's more the cool quotient of being called startup. So I
Yeah, yeah.
remember
So
even Mondelez was being called the world's biggest startup at one
yeah, yeah.
point.
So we even the large companies say we pride in being working like a startup, right? So I think so that's another branding.
Yeah.
But okay, fair. So understood. What's the next one?
So the next stage is pretty much the house of brands.
Hmm.
The fact that you have created a playbook already for the first brand in the system.
Hmm.
You built one brand,
Hmm.
you created distribution. So you have ready infrastructure
Hmm.
and you have one brand in place.
Hmm.
Now it is about amplifying and leveraging this infrastructure that you have to serve more brands that you can create.
Hmm.
And you create a brand that can leverage the existing go to market, and you create multiple brands, maybe going after different consumers in different categories. But the synergy comes from having the common go to market structure, which does not have to be reinvented. And this is why when a brand launched by an established company scales almost overnight to hundreds of crores, and where a startup company hitting even a 25-50 crore turnover is considered a big achievement after about 2 to 3 years also.
Hmm. Hmm. Okay.
And building this house of brands would, I mean, I'd take an Indian example, which is your Marico, your Daburs, and that's how they were built.
Hmm. Hmm. Hmm.
One brand, multiple brands. In fact, Marico stuck to just oils for the longest time
Hmm.
before they could leverage anything else, because they didn't just focus on keeping GTM the same, but they also kept the sourcing the same.
Hmm.
And therefore, and there's also the traditional business of oils.
Hmm. Okay. Okay. Fair. So, and Sharon, for example, now I think of Marico. Yeah.
Hmm,
So now Marico, in its current strategy, whenever it talks to investors, etc., it also speaks about its uh, one of its businesses where
hmm,
they incubate startups, etc. Right.
right.
So in a company that has house of brands,
Hmm,
and when we talk Marico, we talk about Parachute, Safola, Setvet,
right.
yeah, these kind of brands. These all belong to this particular company, and they've created these brands to serve different consumers
Right.
or different needs of the same consumer. Yeah. Now, therefore, that particular business where they incubate some of these brands then becomes a so these small incubated brands will go through that startup, launch you 3A, 3B, while remaining under the aegis of a house of brands, right?
They could or they could not. For
Hmm.
example,
Hmm.
Marico,
Hmm.
when they took over Setwet from Reckitt,
Yeah.
it was a straight fit into the Marico business.
Hmm.
So therefore, they did not go through a long chew for that matter. While
Hmm.
it was already in the market from Winnie, it
Hmm.
directly went into the brand building and as a part of the house of brands.
Interesting.
But when Marico invests in a startup
Hmm.
and purposefully treats the startup as an external setup,
Hmm.
like how they did for Beardo. I'm not sure if they've changed that,
Hmm.
but Beardo operated as a separate business unit.
Yeah.
So they let Beardo evolve, saying
Hmm.
the startup thinking in Beardo could have its own advantages.
Hmm.
So what Marico does then is to shorten the long chew, probably we call
Hmm.
it the short chew, saying we will help you get through that phase a lot faster.
Hmm.
That is where the inputs come in a lot more handy.
Correct. Correct. I know of another business, some a business that was started by one of my juniors from college, called True Elements.
Right,
So Marico acquired that business some time back. So that business would have gone through the PMF or the startup stage, and then they would have been in the stage of long chew,
right.
and then quickly Marico acquired them. I know that some time back they released their first advertising. So
Right,
therefore, you could see the transition from long chew to 3A 3B
yeah,
fairly quickly.
right,
Yeah, because they rode on the food portfolio availability of possibly Marico. I don't know
right,
how they went about it, although it's a brand which is preliminarily sold via e-commerce,
right.
but possibly the funding and the support and everything else accelerated their journey forward.
Absolutely. That's the perfect example for this one.
Okay, fair. So understood. So House of Brand also understood. What else? What's the next?
The next one is where most startup ambitions actually begin,
Hmm.
wanting to be the international brands, house of international brands.
Hmm.
Now, these are not the everyday brands we're talking about. I'm talking about the ones like Mondelez, Colgate Palmolive, Unilever, P&G. And I'm not talking about export markets.
Hmm.
So there are a lot of brands export to the South Asian markets, to the Gulf. That does not make them an international brand. Because if you're selling only to the Indian diaspora, you've not created market pull in different markets outside your home territory.
Hmm.
So if you
Hmm.
look at Cadbury, which is sold in a lot of the Commonwealth countries, it's got its own market pull in every market.
Hmm. Yeah.
Same with the Unilever brands, same with the P&G brands, Colgate the same.
Yeah.
But I was hard pressed within FMCG to find too many international brands from India.
Maybe say okay, in FMCG you're saying, for example,
Hmm.
Bajaj.
Hmm.
It
Auto,
is not
yes. In
FMCG.
Africa, is a
Bajaj.
big
Yeah.
draw. No?
Yeah. For example, the company that I work with, Pidilite, has significant amount of demand in all the developing economies where it works.
As
So
Pidilite or of acquired
no,
businesses.
no, as Pidilite.
Oh wow.
So for example, Fevicol and Dr. Fixit are big businesses in Bangladesh and in Sri
Hmm.
Lanka also. So recently we have done one TVC with Mahanama in Sri Lanka and
Okay.
with Mortaza in Mashrif Mortaza in Bangladesh on Dr. Fixit.
Oh nice.
And so these are good brands which have been
Right.
taken there, developed, seeded,
Hmm.
invested behind with production capability, etc., etc., and they're now possibly in the 3B phase.
Yeah. I if you expand FMCG into CPG, then all of this would then come into play,
Correct.
right?
Correct.
And and that is the building of international brands precisely. It's
Correct.
not just about distributing it; it's
Correct.
about building brands, creating pull in those markets.
Yeah. My understanding is that some of the other, for example, Dabur, I think, has significant Nepal operations.
Hmm.
They build their brands there. It's not just a supply game,
Hmm.
right? So they build their brands there. I think it also has international brands that ways. I'm sure many more
Hmm. Okay.
companies have that. We might not be aware.
Yeah.
I'm definitely aware of Pidilite for sure, and I think I knew about Dabur as well. And there could be many, but possibly
Hmm.
that gives should give a broad idea to our listeners.
So the only Indian company I worked in was Godrej,
Hmm.
and Godrej had presence in a lot of developing markets, or has
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Indonesia, Latin America, Sub-Saharan Africa,
Okay.
but there was minimal brand overlap.
Hmm.
But for one brand called Hit, the home insecticide brand,
Yeah.
but they existed as completely different brands from the way it exists in India.
Okay.
But they were looking to build synergy. I'm not sure what's happened to it. But
Hmm.
yeah, I was part of the team that got Goodnight into Kenya,
Hmm.
but it wasn't necessarily a built brand. It was still a distributed brand at that stage. Maybe it's changed. So, but
Okay.
that is the next stage for the house of brands businesses, right?
Fair. Let's go to the next one then.
Next one is the fairy tale of being the Fortune 500 conglomerates,
Hmm.
which is
Hmm.
where you're acquiring one company, different houses of brands, the way Kraft took over Cadbury, the way Heinz and Kraft came together, the when you're battling more investor pressure, battling the boards, that dictates a consumer behavior. But you are the Fortune 500 company. That's where a lot of people want to be. And that's the end stage I see for FMCG companies. And if I were an FMCG company owner, I would never want to be one. I'd at best want to be a house of brands or a house of international brands with time. But yeah, Fortune 500 is the end state that I look at, where it's
Hmm.
completely in the markets.
Hmm. So this is where you transition from looking at gross revenue to market capitalization.
Absolutely. I see. To be politically incorrect, I'd say you'd transition from looking at consumers to investors
Hmm. Hmm.
or
Hmm.
shareholders.
No, in
Shareholder
fact,
value becomes more important.
correct. So that's where you start possibly playing around with the definition of shareholder, and you write big ass mission statements that contain everybody from employees to consumers to stakeholders to vendors to
Right.
whales and dolphins in the world. Yeah. Okay. Excellent. So there. So this was the sixth stage, right?
Right.
Okay. So therefore, we spoke about the fact that each business goes through kind of these stages with varying degrees of time spent in each one of them, depending on which sector they are in, what is the kind of external impetus they are getting when they are in a certain stage, and we discuss some of those examples.
Yeah, it could be their efficiency, could be their ambition, which dictates the time period in each
Yeah,
stage.
yeah, yeah. And maybe for everybody to try and see where their company stands today, we should possibly recount all six of them. But before we do, I think there is a disclaimer that don't go by traditional definition of what how it is used in the market. The market possibly even terms some of the 500 crore companies as startups. So that is not how we are defining it. So the first stage, like Sharon said, was startup, where Sharon spoke about the fact that this is the stage where they are getting their hands around their PMF and want consumer validation, want a conceptual validation, etc. Once that is done, and this stage brings its own challenges and therefore you need to focus on a few things to get it right. Yeah. Then the next stage is the long chew, as you defined it, Sharon, which is about making sure that you are now you've got the validation. Now you have to translate that particular validation into a viable business.
Right.
So therefore, you're setting up your GTM, you're setting up your availability, you're setting up your various factors which will enable your product to move seamlessly from production to consumer, and then you are able to do it sustainably and repeatably. Yeah, that is where possibly a lot of the world will see that you are a sustainable business. You are here to play.
Right.
Yeah, and then what you got into was then a two pronged stage, which is 3A 3B. 3A is about making a brand, which you called as brand optimization, making a brand by consistently delivering a certain kind of promise to consumers, and therefore waiting till a certain number of consumers get your promise delivered, experience your promise,
Mm.
and then that is how your brand gets constructed, but it will take a lot of time there. The second option there is 3B, which is the brand building, where you don't wait for every consumer to experience your product or a service, but you decide what your promise bundle is going to be, and then you communicate that bundle to consumers across the world
Right.
and or across the country, and thereby make sure that you get early adoption, you get faster adoption, etc., etc.
Mm.
Yeah. And hopefully by that time you start creating a brand, you've tasted the success, your brand is well known amongst people, etc. Then the next possible example, or the next possible stage that you spoke about was house of brands, where from one brand riding on a particular GTM and all the resources you put on it, that gives you the option of getting into more brands necessitated by the need to service other needs of the same consumer or expanding to a new consumer set. But all of those brands tend to benefit from the hard work that you've done during
In the
long
long
chew.
chew.
Yeah,
Right.
during the long chew to set up your GTM and your complete structure, etc. And that's how you create house of brands. We spoke about Marico, and an interesting example of Marico not only having a house of brand but also uh, incubating startups, accelerating them through the long chew and directly into 3B stage,
Right.
right? Then we spoke about from house of brands, we went to house of international brands, where you not only export to international markets, but you also do brand building in international market and ensure a consumer pull. If you're
Right.
only exporting, then you are in the long chew phase in the
New markets.
new market, while you might be a house of brand in the current market.
Right.
Yeah. So all the Indian companies. So while there are examples of various international companies like Cadbury, or Mondelez or Nestle or HUL, etc., Unilever, etc., which have created house of international brands. We were trying to see if there are examples of Indian companies having reached that stage, and we possibly quoted example of Pidilite, um,
Dabur.
possibly a Dabur in Nepal, and many other countries. Forgive our uh, uh, lack of information possibly on this subject about various other companies.
Right.
And then last, and possibly a dream that a lot of the guys might have, to progress to Fortune 500 company, where you create, as we jokingly said, you start creating shareholder value and stop worrying about the value consumers, right? But you really create very big brands. It requires you to take big bets, like betting on a certain sector or betting on a certain company. You do acquisitions, etc. But
Right.
that then it becomes a matter of scale. Yeah. So I think that's a lovely journey, uh, that it seems a fairy tale journey actually, from a startup to a Fortune 500. And now I can make sense of the title that you put, Sharon. क्योंकि Fortune 500 भी एक startup थी. Very good. I like the title now.
Right. So, in fact, if you look at any brand, it's not just for India, right? Any market, any brand, any business in FMCG would have gone through this phase, maybe even hundreds of years ago. This is the
Yeah.
same stages they would have gone through.
Yeah.
And I was just looking up how many FMCG companies there are in India.
Mm-hmm.
The registered count is about 500, close to 500.
Okay.
And the unregistered, because, like I said, there are no entry barriers and exit barriers,
Hmm.
the count goes even up to 5,000.
Yeah.
So that's the long tail is pretty
Hmm.
big.
Hmm.
And therefore, each of them would fall into different stages here. And it
Hmm.
would augur well for the FMCG business owners, the marketers, CEOs to understand which stage they are in, and therefore focus their priorities accordingly
Hmm.
instead of trying to handle too much all the time. This actually should help relieve a lot of confusion.
Interesting. Fair. I think it serves as a good guide. Make sure that you know your guardrails, you know the next stage, and therefore you're getting ready for it. In fact, something that occurred to me just when you were describing the last part, Sharon, is that even a marketer or a person or a personality goes through the same stages.
Oh,
Yeah.
fair enough.
Possibly let's use the same structure, but let's, in one of the other episodes, let's talk about creating a personal brand. And it might also actually go through the exactly the same structure as I see it.
Very, very likely. And I look forward to you leading that one.
Correct. So on that note, let's leave this as a food for thought for our listeners. And thank you very much for this insightful session, Sharon. Really, really useful. Thank you.
Thank you, Sudeep.
Thank you for listening to CoB, Conversations on the Business of Brands with Sudeep Chawla and Sharvana Raghavan. Subscribe and learn more at cobcast.net. That's CoBBcast.net.